Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where it's about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Prodigal Son. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I like the intro where you have Martin, in his first, group session since being back, and it's the whole thing about he's like, oh, things are good, it's like, well, my boy, he's kind of going through something right now, but for him it's like, but my family, both my children, they're so good, they're in a really good place, as they do their father proud. And it's like, and I love the hard cut to like Ainsley at the end of season 1, and then obviously what we got peaks of, Malcolm cleaning up the crime scene last episode. So and the contrast between that and Jessica like talking to Malcolm, because it's like she's like, something's definitely up because you're not going to your therapy sessions, that speaks volumes. But for Malcolm, it's like, I need to step away from therapy for a little bit. She's like, what is it? You can talk to me, even if it's something of the sexual nature, which I love later on. It's like, yeah, mom's getting a little worried about it, and it's like, oh, let me guess, she assumed it was something of the sexual nature. But it's this complicated thing where Malcolm can't talk to anyone about it in any facet, and that's what Martin enjoys about it. It's like, oh, but he has me, because what has he always wanted? He wanted him and Malcolm. I mean, to be fair, that doesn't just apply to Malcolm, it applies to his entire family. He kind of gets it with Ainsley because Ainsley wanted to know him more, so he's kind of already got that. But for Malcolm's always kept him at a distance. But it's like, Malcolm's his boy, so it's like, when he looks at Malcolm, he probably sees like a mirror image of himself. So it is a situation of, I need to bridge this gap. It's like we could be so much closer, but Malcolm tends to push him away because Malcolm doesn't want to become him, even though, he's denied it all his life, that side of himself. And obviously that's something he came to realize last episode. It's something he's continuing to realize and, process in the long run. But I guess that's also why he stopped going to therapy, because it's like, well, I could talk about stuff before therapy, I can't talk about this, like I can't let anyone know, like it's something I have to keep inside, because he can't even talk to Ainsley about it, because Ainsley knows one version of the story and he wants her to keep knowing that, because he doesn't want her to know the truth, so he can't even talk to her about it. So it's like, who's the one person you can turn to in this situation? Is your serial killer father. So that's the thing. Obviously, the main aspect of this case, and obviously that's always the interesting thing, is about stories and crime dramas like this, when it's like, when there's that police procedural element of solving a crime, how there's the story or structure to create the parallels between the case and the person investigating. In this particular case, obviously being Malcolm, dealing with demons of his own as they're dealing with a priest who was killed. And it's like, oh, and it's in Aramaic, but it says Abaddon. And it's like, who is the killer? It's like, well, the devil. So Malcolm's not someone who really believes in all of that. Obviously, Gil is a very religious person. So he's like, when the archbishop was like, I can't give you that information, it's like, fine. Malcolm's like, what? He literally just said he's going to be impeding our investigation. You just kind of let him slide. It's like, it's a church, so you kind of got to, learn to kind of work around that type of situation. I thought that would have become a bigger issue in the episode, but it turned out not to be the case. I thought maybe Gil's own views and stuff like would have impeded the case, but it turns out not to be a thing. I thought it was going to be a bigger thing than it was, but it turned out not to be that. But obviously they end up, Malcolm ends up learning from his dad, who now has a new bestie, Friar Peter, who basically, it's like, I had different views from the church and eventually went off and became a serial killer. And it's like, hey, so they had this conversation. They've kind of hit it off, because obviously Father Friar knows about exorcisms and stuff like that. And obviously it turned interesting. It turns out that exorcisms and surgery kind of go hand in hand. So for both of them to be there, to be like, oh, this is actually quite fascinating, because exorcisms in the past were kind of treated like surgery. Like if you had some kind of illness or something, like an exorcism would kind of be used and called for. And there's even a book on like what happened to the father. Like there's actually a book written about kind of explaining the how-to about performing an exorcism. Obviously, they go and visit that dude. I'm blanking on his name. I want to say Simon, but I don't think it is. No, it might have been Simon, but it's like his mom was like, "Yeah, just stay in the salt." Like the moment she started putting down the salt, I was like, oh, "Okay." I like that because the show always has a creepy element, but I think it's neat that like this is kind of like a quote unquote exorcism episode, considering Fox had I think it was a reboot of they had the Exorcist TV show. So I thought this is me thinking too much about it, but I thought it was neat. It just added this even like darker and creepy aspect of the episode. But especially because of the salt thing, because I'm like, oh, I've watched enough Supernatural. I mean, I know that that's typically a ghost thing, but that's only just because of Supernatural. But I think it's a demon thing as well. But it's meant to kind of make it so that no evil can cross, type of thing. But yeah, it's like stay in the salt, and obviously JT being with them and being like, oh, this is creepy as hell, especially the way Simon's acting, and it's like because apparently like exorcisms can only happen if you can get like a psychologist to kind of sign off of it, which is interesting because obviously that's like I didn't talk. This should have been the first thing that came on my mind. It's like there's an entire show kind of based on that called Evil. Once again, if you've not seen Evil, it's a really damn good show. I need season 2 to come out like hella soon. But sorry, going on a tangent, but it immediately made me think of that because that plays a role in the that show in its own right. But the whole Simon thing, and Malcolm testing the waters, and it's even JT being like, Malcolm Bright always crossing the line, and it sets Simon off and everything, and then like his voice changed and shit. I was like, oh shit, like he got super sinister, being like, oh, I knew it, you're just like me, I see basically I see the evil in you, which back-to-back episodes of just like for Malcolm, it's like everyone can kind of see him for who he is. It's like he said it last episode, it's like, is it my hair, like why does everyone keep calling me a murderer? And now it's like that's kind of being thrown at him because he's kind of exuding that, because everyone knows like, yeah, something's just not right, you're a little off. They've noticed it. Danny in particular has noticed it. But Malcolm, even though Simon kind of flipped out, like the moment they got back across the salt, like he like fell back and everything. And it turns out like there's no way Simon could have done it because he went into a frenzy, and whoever did this was very meticulous. Like it was like 44 like pretty precise slices. So Simon kind of got set off. So him getting set off like that shows that he could have not been the one who done it. So they're back to the drawing board trying to figure out who did it. Malcolm is having that nightmare where he ends up visiting, was it Agnes? And partway through it, she transforms into Ainsley, being like, "Oh, you have to tell someone about it or something, because it's like they're cops and they're eventually going to find out." And it's like she pulls up the knife. She's like, "Well, I forgot what she was saying, but basically it's like, we got to handle this again, or be careful about it, because eventually, or you're going to have to talk to someone about it because they're going to eventually find out about it." So. And that nightmare even loved, and he was like, why are you, when he wakes up and Danny's wearing body armor, he's like, why were you wearing that? She's like, your nightmares can be pretty intense. He is like, you're not kidding. And she can tell that something is off with Malcolm, but he's not really talking about it. Which I brought this up last episode. I think it's so interesting because she was talking to Gil last episode about the whole Jessica thing, but it's interesting because she kind of, I guess she, like I brought up last episode, she kind of follows her own advice with Malcolm, but at the same time she kind of doesn't. But I guess it's Malcolm's situation is never 100. I mean, he's always put himself in danger, so I guess for her it's not the same thing as the Jessica and Gil situation. I think that I just think that's such an interesting like do as I say, not as I do type of thing to a certain extent, but she's kind of saying don't do this, but kind of doing it herself, I find that fascinating. But after that conversation about like that painter and stuff like that, it's like, oh, it led them to think lead poisoning, and that basically that's what this is all about. At first they thought it was Sister Agnes, but it turns out it was the main painter. Side note, I gotta look into it. It was bothering me the entire damn episode. I should have looked it up before I did this recording. The actor who plays the Archbishop, like there's like a specific TV show or something I associate with him. There's like some specific role that I just can't remember what I know him from. It bothers the crap out of him because I'm like, I know you from something, not just like a whole bunch of things. It feels like there's one specific thing in my head I'm thinking of when it comes to that actor, but I can't remember what it was and is, and it was rubbing me the wrong way the entire episode. I was like, oh, I gotta figure that out. So I'm gonna look it up on IMDb later. But it was interesting because for Malcolm, him and the Archbishop had that whole conversation about, wishing, when it comes to religion, like, he wishes there could be a situation of it just kind of religion being something that can just be kind of dealt with and just kind of make all his problems go away, but it doesn't work like that. But the Archbishop was kind of like, well, the main thing that priests do is we listen. So if there's something you want to kind of get off your shoulders, but then we find out, like, in actuality, the real killer behind all this was the main dude who was doing all the painting. He's the one that's sick, and obviously, like, he was caught in this delusion, and so he's thinking that he's possessed, and he was listening to the book, so he thinks, like, there's a devil inside of him. Malcolm's talking to Father Friar Peter and his dad, which they were in the middle of the game. He's like, oh, come on, I was in the middle of this. But it's like, okay, they're walking him through how to deal with this situation. It's like, well, just lock them in a room. And, I guess the point was to kind of wait for the delusion to pass. But it's like, oh, you're locked in there with them. Okay, so you're not going to be able to just talk your way out of this. Friar Peter was like, you're going to have to perform an exorcism. And it's like, I think it's a thing of, they didn't really say this, but I think the point was because he's in such a delusional state, because it's all so real to him, if you make it seem like an actual exorcism is happening, he's going to believe it. So it does kind of work. And, well, and then, he had to finish the exorcism by knocking Peter out. But it's a situation that, like I said, it made Malcolm have to continue to kind of confront his own issues, because even in that dude's delusion, he was talking about, once again, like, yeah, I see the evil in you. And once again, it's just like every time he turns around, like, other people are seeing this in Malcolm. And I think that's kind of the line of, like, where they're going with that, in the sense that other people can see it in him, but he refuses to see it in himself. He doesn't want to admit that it's there, so. And ultimately, at the end of the day, like, Martin's so, happy, and, Malcolm's still solemn about everything. And Malcolm finally opens up to him. It's like, yes, the whole Endcott situation, it does bother him, that it's like, oh, like, because for him, it's like, it was on me. I don't really have anyone else I could really blame for. He's like, whoa, because for Malcolm, it was like, it was my idea. Like, the fact is that I could come up with that is what bothers him the most, But he's like, yeah, but I'm the one, isn't it kind of me? And then Malcolm was like, yeah, it is. You are a part of me. So that's where that came from. So I do kind of owe that to you. He's like, and he's looking at, like, oh, my boy, you're admitting that, you've denied it for so long that I'm a part of you. But it makes me almost like all warm and fuzzy to know that you finally accept that. He's like, yeah, but now that, don't get me wrong, Dad. It's not like that's a good thing. I mean, it's not like, oh, you're accepting, like, oh, that part of you inside of me. It's like, no. Now that I know it's there, I can lock it away. I can walk away from it, and I can leave it behind. And obviously for Martin, he's looking at it as probably like and not, if you're denying that part of me inside of you, that's like denying me. We are connected. We're father and son. So for you to pull away from me in that regard. So that's why he's got the idea later on, like, oh, my son needs me. I need to be out there. Like, I was hoping we could, come together, but it's also Malcolm denying everything. So I think in his mind, it's like, that's not going to be helpful from Malcolm, but I need to be there for him. And eventually, I'm sure it's going to be a thing of, I need to be there for Ainsley as well. And Friar Peter was like, hey, we have this group. It's all about Exodus. And it's like, so maybe there's a group of serial killers that are going to bust out of this place, which I'm assuming that's going to be like a particular storyline this season. We'll see kind of how that storyline ends up playing out. But another angle to this whole situation is obviously earlier in the episode, Malcolm and there was that scene between Ainsley and Malcolm where he walks in, he sees her with the knife. He's like, what are you doing? She's like, I'm just setting the table. He's like, oh, okay. She's like, wait. She's thinking about it. She's like, was it one of these that you used? And he was like, what, family cutlery? No. And then she was like, I actually don't remember much from that night. It's like, I was there, and Endcott was there, but then you were, but she's like, then there's a blank spot. He's like, well, that's kind of normal. Once again, in his mind, he's saving his sister because he doesn't want this one thing to haunt her, But once again, that's the bad thing about it. She's not being haunted by it because she doesn't remember. He is, though, because once again, something only he can't confide in anyone. He can't confide in Danny about it. He can't confide in Gil or JT about it. Well, definitely not JT. Or, there's no one to talk to. Can't talk to his mom about it either, because it would also be admitting not only the crime he committed, but also what happened to Ainsley. So it's not just about himself. Like, if he has to be burdened by this, if it means protecting his little sister, then so be it, So, because he's always kind of protected her by wanting, it's like any connection to their dad. He's always been the one that not necessarily embraced it, but kind of went down that route. And Ainsley was the one that was always kind of kept at a distance until last season. It's kind of like the first time they've really spent some quote unquote quality time together. But then there's a whole thing of like Ainsley's moving back to her apartment. It's like mom is helping out and everything. And even Ainsley was like, yeah, it's kind of weird the way mom's acting. And it's like, oh. And obviously they kind of associate this eventually with like, oh yeah, it's with Gil and everything. And eventually Ainsley kind of picks up, they're like, okay, you're meddling and you're making yourself super busy. This is definitely about Gil. Because it's like, oh, because she's like, I checked your phone and Gil called you like 7 times. And because Ainsley wasn't aware of it, but Malcolm was aware of the whole, Gil and Jessica's situation. But for Ainsley, she's like, telling her mom to kind of, tell him the truth. Like, it's like, obviously it's something there. You like him. So kind of, take that leap. And obviously we see his side of things where it's like, he keeps checking his phone. And obviously he has this conversation with JT about, sometimes maybe you do have to just kind of wait things out, which we'll get to JT's side of things soon enough. But for Gil, like, Jessica finally calls him and they talk, but it's not what he was hoping, because he was thinking like, hey, so we can pick out kind of where things were. And it's like, but she doesn't respond. She's actually pushing him away because it's like, I heard what you said. He's like, you heard the conversation about me between me and Danny. And she's like, maybe you're not wrong. Like, maybe me and my family are cursed. The whole thing with Martin, the whole world that I'm a part of. And it's like, because of me, you got hurt. He's like, but you saved me. And she's like, let me save you again. Because for her, she's like, I'm broken. And I'm not going to do, like, what if, this is a lot. I am a lot. I come with a lot of baggage. And it's like, I don't want you to get hurt. Because for her, it's like, anyone that gets close gets cut. And it's like, it's sad because obviously she does care for Gil, but it's because she cares for Gil. Like, I don't want, because I think you could also make the argument she's seen what happens to people who get too close to this family, not just in her regard. I mean, let's not forget the Eve situation. I'm sure she didn't go there, but I'm sure there's some part of her that's like, yeah, anyone that gets close to this family, like some terrible fate ends up befalling them. And, this family is cursed. So she kind of pushes Gil away. And Ainsley's like, all I told you to do was tell your truth. She's like, Mom, you are kind of broken. She's like, and in her own right, she was like, but, we all kind of are. You said Dad broke us, and that's true. So for that, she's like, I'm going to stay here with you, Mom. I'm not moving out right now. So maybe that'll play into Ainsley's story about potentially her remembering or rediscovering, like, the truth of what happened that night. We'll see. But it's kind of sad to see that, And I'm curious what kind of effect that's going to have on Gil going forward. But another element to this episode was the whole situation with JT. Still dealing for the aftermath of that whole thing last episode. And now it's like, so what do you want to bring up a complaint? But JT's like in this complicated thing as both a black man and a cop. It's like, as a black man, of course he wants to, because it's like, you shouldn't stand for that shit. But at the same time, it's like, also as a cop, it's like, I know you've got my back, Gil, but what about everyone else? Like, if I'm like making a report against another cop, like, people are going to look at him in a certain way, And then later on in the episode, when he was calling for backup, they didn't respond. It's like, oh, this is a line meant for detectives. It's a situation where things could have gone sideways and they didn't have his back. And Gil was chewing them out later on because Malcolm was having this conversation with Danny too. For Danny, it's hard with everything. She's like, it's like racism has always been there, but it's like for the first time people have kind of opened their eyes to see like what's there, the whole, cop situation. And obviously her and JT are no exception, with that situation. Yeah, you could make the argument maybe their situation's even more worse, not even just worse, just complicated, because not only are you black, you're also a cop, that adds an extra layer to the whole thing. And that's where JT has that like complicated thing of like, well, what do I do? And he's like, for him, it's like, I've got a family and a career to kind of look after. So like, do I try to do the right thing? Cause like, Malcolm and Danny are like, we got your back. But for him, he's like, I'm the one that's got to, fix this situation. Cause that situation could have ended badly for all of them. Like my situation is now affecting everyone else's jobs and everyone else's life because, he's been a cop for the past 10 years, and now it's like, he's got a baby, on the way. So he's thinking about that type of stuff. So do I protect my career? Because this is a type of situation of like, if he, this could have been like I said, a terrible situation where they could have needed backup and they couldn't because of his circumstances, which those circumstances aren't his fault. It's everyone else's, like those other cops who are like toying with that situation where like, under different circumstances, a fellow cop could have died and you could have gotten other cops, Danny or Gil or, even Malcolm killed under those circumstances, other innocent people, so it's a complicated thing. And we see JT kind of walking away. It's just like, I'm curious to see what route he's going to go, like how he plans on handling that. That's because even Malcolm asked him early in the episodes, like, how are you? He's like, I'm fine. It's like, Malcolm's like, yeah, I every time I'm saying I'm fine, I'm lying. And, that's, I'm curious to see how JT plays this out, like where that storyline kind of goes for him. And, obviously, for Danny as well, like with this whole situation, so that's definitely going to be interesting to see where things kind of go along that route. It's going to be interesting to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.